Welcome back to my world of stuff. Just a quick video to chat a little bit about Stranger Things. The second part of Series 4, Volume 2, has just dropped on Netflix. At the time of writing, it's Saturday the 2nd of July. And the first 7 episodes debuted about 3 weeks ago on Netflix, with the second volume, 2 episodes arriving on Friday. And I've actually binged this series. Certainly binged the last 2 episodes. Stranger Things is an extraordinary TV show, which possibly because it's been around for 4 years now, 4 series, perhaps people sort of take for granted a little bit. But I think this is the first streaming era series that really became cultural phenomenon. I think there have been streaming hits before, things like House of Cards, but Stranger Things was one that really made its mark as something unique and different, and something that you weren't likely to see on a traditional terrestrial TV network. And its 4th series has seen it reaching new heights of popularity. Apparently it's reported that when the last 2 episodes arrived on Netflix on Friday, some servers couldn't cope with the demand, and a number of customers were met with an apology message asking them to try again later. That's the mark of a real phenomenon, an absolute what would once have been called water cooler television show. There are several interesting things about this particular series, beyond the frankly brilliant story and the superb narrative structure that the Duffer brothers, who wrote and created the series and write and direct most of it, the decision that they took with this particular series, which was so extraordinary and so fulfilling from a viewer's point of view. But what's interesting is the way that Netflix have released it. Now, Netflix, of course, traditionally release their shows in a big lump. You know, there's 10 episodes of this new series, just 8 episodes of the new series, binge it and enjoy it. But that does cause a problem, as has been noted in by many commentators, that a show is hot for a few weeks, a few days, when it arrives, and then people move on to the next one that arrives the week afterwards or the week after that. Shows have a short shelf life in terms of being the flavour of the month. And it looks with this series as if Netflix are starting to dip their toe in the waters of a more traditional release pattern of releasing an episode a week, which is the way that people like me grew up watching our TV. If you wanted to watch Doctor Who, you watched it up week by week. If you wanted to watch The X-Files, you watched it week by week. If you wanted to watch UFO, Space 1999, you watched it week by week. Nowadays, certainly Netflix has fashioned itself around this model of delivering vast amounts of content in great big batches of, as I say, 8-10 episodes. It tends to be 8 or 10. But that does mean, as I've said, that shows sort of come and go very quickly, and people have to watch them quickly and move on to the next one. It doesn't give shows an opportunity to build an audience and find an audience to become word-of-mouth hits. And I think that's what Stranger Things, this particular series, seems to be doing. And I think possibly because of Netflix's financial woes, which I discussed in a video a bit earlier on, if you look back that way. Netflix are losing subscribers, whereas the likes of Amazon and Disney, which are adopting a more familiar weekly release schedule for a lot of their shows, are getting more subscribers, because I think people do like that traditional model of watching a TV show every week, because it does give you the opportunity to say, did you watch this week's episode of, what do you think of this week's episode of X show, rather than have you seen this show? No, I haven't watched it yet. I've watched it all, it's great. And then it never comes up in conversation again, and shows tend to get absorbed into the morass of entertainment that's out there. But shows that appear weekly, they build an audience. As I say, it's word of mouth. You can recommend a show to people, and people follow it on that sort of weekly release schedule. And I'm interested to see that Netflix have done this with Stranger Things. I think it's a very sensible decision. Whether it's one they're going to continue with shows in the future, excuse me, we have the visitor, the inevitable visitor, I don't know, but I think it's a damn good idea. When Stranger Things arrived, this particular series, we had the first 7 episodes, and then we've just had the last 2 episodes. And those 7 episodes, they were mighty long. They were mighty long. Now, I've mentioned previously about, I do wish that Netflix would trim their shows down to 40, 45 minutes, the typical traditional accepted length of an American TV episode. Being a streaming service, of course, they don't have to do that. They can let their creators run riot, really. But I think that often means that you have shows with episodes that drag and really should be getting a move on, but are just sort of being a bit self-indulgent. So when I saw that Stranger Things Volume 1, Season 4, consisted of episodes, most of which were well over an hour, 1 or 2, 90 minutes, I rolled my eyes a bit and thought this is going to be a bit of a slog, because no matter how good it is, 90-minute episode, it's a film, basically. You're watching a film. But I can see the logic in them taking that approach with this particular series, because having watched the whole lot, and I'll try to avoid any obvious spoilers here, the scenario that the Duffers created for the series, thank you, split all the characters up into 4 or 5 separate groups, which meant that we had 4 or 5 separate storylines to follow throughout each episode. Almost in a soap opera style, if you like, with different characters in different situations, reacting and working together. And the danger with that, of course, is if 1 or 2 of those stories aren't very interesting, you're going to be, you're going to be, Rosie, you're a pain, aren't you? You're going to be drumming your fingers waiting for the bit you're really interested in. But Stranger Things 4 didn't make that mistake, because every one of the storylines was absolutely riveting, absolutely fascinating. And there were never any sags in the episodes where you thought, I want to go back to this part of the story. I want to go back to see what Eleven is doing. I want to see what's happening in Russia with Hopper. Because every one of the stories was so well crafted and put together so well that it just kept you enthralled for the 90 minutes. So even though it was 90 minutes, it didn't really feel like it, because there were never those sort of longeurs, if you like, where you wanted a change of scene. So the story now, of course, is that after the 3rd season, the characters are all moving on and they're growing up, and I think that reflects the fact that the young cast, led predominantly by Millie Bobby Brown as the mysterious Eleven, she's moved away now. She's gone to college. Mike is still her boyfriend. He's still living in Hawkins. He's worried that they might grow apart. He's worried that he hasn't expressed how much he feels for her. Other characters are going off in different directions. We know that Hopper, who's presumed dead, the sheriff of Hawkins, played by the brilliant David Harbour, we thought that he'd died at the end of the last series, but we quickly realised he wasn't dead. He was holed up in Russia. Winona Ryder's character discovers that he's alive and sets off to Russia to try and rescue him from this frozen gulag where he's locked up. And the other kids all split up in different groups, investigating the strange murder sprees which are bedeviling Hawkins, where teenagers are being horribly, and I have to say horribly, mutilated by some strange force which they quickly realise is connected with the Upside Down, the bizarre parallel dimension which has been featured throughout the series since it began. So you've got all these storylines running, different characters paired up in different ways. And one of the things that I think people liked about Stranger Things originally was that you had this disparate group of characters and you saw them all getting along with each other and having adventures. But now, reflecting real life, they've split up a little bit. They're still friends, but they're not together all the time. They go off and have their own little lives and things. And that does reflect what we all do. You know, we have our friends in school or college, and then we probably keep in touch with them, but we don't see them as much because they've got their own lives to lead. And that's what this show has sort of reflected in this series. The villain of the piece is a creature called Vecnu. And this is a terrifying monster from the Upside Down, which uses the gateway to reach in and torment and, as I said, horribly mutilate teenagers. It's gone full on horror with this particular series. Its victims are levitated into the air, then their limbs start to crack and they're basically distorted out of all human shape. It's full on horror, and there's a lot of horror in this series. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of, scenes of extreme violence. It's very, even though it's a show with young people in the cast, it's very much, you wouldn't let young children watch this. It's very intense. Scenes of an intense nature. But basically what I wanted to say about the series, and I'm not going to go to the ins and outs of the plots and the characters, But it's just a terrific 7-episode run of this show. I'm one of the ones, I really like season 3. I wasn't a big fan of season 2. I felt it lost something. Season 3, the whole thing with the Starcourt Mall, I thought was really interesting and very evocative of the 1980s. It really created that feel of Back to the Future and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It had a very 1980s vibe to it. This is obviously still set in that time. It isn't quite, doesn't have the same visual look. It's easy to forget that it's the 1980s, apart of course from the regular use of Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, which of course has soared to #1 in the UK charts on the back of this series. And I think that again is another example of how this show has become part of the cultural zeitgeist, because a song in it has attracted the attention of the audience who probably never heard of it or Kate Bush, who are now downloading it like crazy and making it a huge hit single all over again. I love all the characters in this. Everyone, they all have their own moments in the sun, and that's done by splitting them up, pairing them up, so they got their own different adventures. And I love the way that all those different adventures, those different stories, they all sort of inadvertently, towards the end of the series, all dovetail because they're all working towards the same thing in their own different ways. It's absolutely magnificent. I mean, if you haven't seen this series yet, or you've been put off by the length of the episodes, just get stuck in because it will fly by. Beautifully made. It's rumoured that each episode cost $30 million. And that absolutely shows. I mean, the visual effects are astonishing. The scale of the sets, the production, the stuff in Russia, which some people have said is not their favourite part of the show. But I really like that because that's the sort of the adult story, if you like, of Hopper and Winona Ryder's Joyce trying to rescue him. That doesn't involve the kids. That's the sort of the adult storyline. And there's some gritty, grim stuff in there, especially when the Demi-Gorgon creatures from the previous series, turns out that they're in the Gulag and there's sort of mad carnage. It's very intense. We get to learn more about Eleven's origin. We find out that Vecnu has a fairly close connection with 11 and the experiments that brought her into being. We learn more about the other characters as they're all growing up. It's sort of, I hate the expression, but there are coming of age elements throughout the series as the characters like Dustin, who is still one of the great, comedy characters, but he's growing up. Will, who's the focus of the first series, he disappeared in the first series. He's got his own sort of issues. He's not sure if he still fits into this group or if people are still aware of him, really. All the stuff with Steve Harrington, played by Joe Keery, him realising that he's made mistakes throughout his life. Bearing in mind he's only in his 20s. He's had vacuous relationships and he wants to find a bit of a purpose. It's all very much human drama that's interweaved through all this supernatural sci-fi insanity. It's just extraordinary. And I didn't really think that into its 4th series, Stranger Things would have the ability to reinvent itself or redefine itself as its story moves on through the lives of the characters. Absolutely terrific entertainment. It gets a 10 out of 10 for me because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I went into the last episode, which is 2 hours, 20 minutes long, thinking I'll watch this in bits, but I flew through it because, as I've said, every storyline is interesting. Every storyline keeps you wanting to come back. The action, the last episode, there's a sort of 20-minute coda which reminded me of Return of the King, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, which sort of ties things up a little bit. But there's a good 30-40 minutes before that, which is just so exciting. It's about as exciting as anything I've seen in the last few years. Edge of the seat excitement when the final confrontation with Vecnu takes place. Absolutely terrific entertainment. So I've kept it sort of vague. I don't think there's any huge spoilers here. I mean, there are surprises, there's shocks. There's a lot of very visceral horror and violence, which is going to disturb some people undoubtedly. But it's just a triumph of the imagination and an absolute triumph for Netflix. And I hope that they will move on from this staggered release model. And I can't imagine that they will automatically do it, but I'm hoping that they will pick up on the success of this and consider splitting series in the future, because it just extends their shelf life. It extends our enjoyment of them, because we don't binge them all on a weekend. We've got more episodes to look forward to in a few weeks' time. So that's Stranger Things series season 4, which is now available in its entirety on Netflix. Really need to watch it. If you've watched it, why not leave a message down below? Tell me what you thought of it. Tell me what your favourite moments are, your favourite characters, because it is one of those shows with a big cast and a lot going on. And it'd be interesting to know which characters are chiming. I like all the characters. There's nobody I don't like, which is, again, incredible triumph of storytelling in that every character has got an interesting tale to tell, and there's nobody that you resent spending time with. It really is absolutely superb. And in a year which has already been an embarrassment of riches in terms of great television, this is right up there with the best of it. So comes very highly recommended. So yeah, let me know what you thought of it. Favourite characters, favourite storylines, and where you think the show will go next, because it does end on, without spoiling things too much, there is a sort of a cliffhanger leading into what's going to be the final season, probably sometime next year or the year after. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment, and until I see you next time, keep taking the stuff.